Welcome to English Tale, where emotions speak louder and English becomes natural. I was only 12 when I realized my mother was not like the other mothers. She never complained, never cried, never shouted at me when I left my dirty socks in the living room, but I could see it in her eyes, behind her smile, behind her soft voice. There was pain. It lived in her bones, a silent scream that echoed every time she stood up too fast or walked too far. My name is Lena, and this is the story of how my mother taught me the meaning of strength, sacrifice, and unconditional love. I grew up in a small rented apartment in the edge of town, in a neighborhood where buses rarely ran on time, and the walls were thin enough to hear your neighbor sneeze. Our place was modest. 2 rooms, a creaky kitchen, and a window that faced the back of a bakery. Every morning I'd wake up to the smell of freshly baked bread, and for a moment I'd forget that we didn't have any. My mother, Nadia, worked long hours as a tailor. She'd come home with sore fingers and a bent back, her hands stained with fabric dye. But she never let me see her struggle. Not really. She would just ruffle my hair, kiss my forehead, and ask me about school with a tired but loving smile. It wasn't until her coughing started that I realized something was very wrong. It began as a little thing, a dry cough here and there. She'd brush it off. "It's the fabric dust, Lena. Don't worry, sweetheart." But soon it turned into long fits of choking coughs that made her eyes water and her chest heave. At night, I'd wake up to the sound of her struggling to breathe, her hands trembling as she tried to stifle the sound with a pillow so she wouldn't wake me. But I heard her. I always heard her. One day, I came home from school and found her collapsed on the kitchen floor. The kettle was whistling. The rice was burning, and my mother was barely breathing. That was the first time I rode in an ambulance. The flashing lights, the oxygen mask, the way the nurse held my hand because I wouldn't stop crying. They said it was chronic lung disease. Advanced. She had been sick for a long time, but she had hidden it, ignoring the signs, pushing through the pain. Because we couldn't afford a doctor. Because she didn't want to worry me. Because we were poor. And she was all I had. I remember sitting in the cold hospital hallway, staring at the vending machine, and wondering if I should buy soup or save the money for tomorrow's bus fare. A woman next to me offered me a sandwich. I thanked her, but I couldn't eat. My stomach was twisted in knots. When the doctor finally came out, he sat beside me and said gently, "Your mother is a fighter, but she needs care, daily medication, oxygen support, and rest. And she can't go back to working those long hours." I blinked. "But who will pay the rent?" He looked at me and said nothing. That silence told me everything. The next few months were like living in a storm. Everything changed. I stopped going out after school. I'd run home, check on her breathing, make her soup, boil her meds, and wash her clothes. I learned to cook from YouTube. I sold old toys on the street. I babysat. I cleaned neighbors' houses on weekends. I was 14 when I became the adult in the house. But I never once blamed her. Because every time I looked into her eyes, I saw the woman who raised me single-handedly, who gave up her dreams so I could have a future, who stayed up all night sewing dresses so I could have a birthday cake. And now it was my turn. One night, I found her crying. It broke me. She had been trying so hard to hide her pain, but that night she couldn't anymore. Her chest hurt. Her back hurt. Her dignity hurt. "I'm sorry, Lena," she whispered. You're just a child. You shouldn't have to take care of me." I held her hand. "You took care of me all my life. This is nothing, Mama." She looked at me, her eyes wet, and whispered, "I'm scared." "What if I don't make it?" I shook my head. "You will. You have to. I still need you." And we just cried. Together. On that old threadbare couch. We lived like that for a long while. Some days were better than others. Some days she could walk to the kitchen. Other days, she couldn't even lift her head. I did what I could. Sometimes, I skipped school. Sometimes I begged. Once I even stole, just a loaf of bread when we hadn't eaten in 2 days. But I paid it back. I returned it, ashamed, when I got my babysitting money. The old storekeeper just hugged me and said, "You're a good kid. Take care of your mother. We weren't alone." Not really. Some people helped in little ways. A neighbor who brought us dinner once a week. A kind librarian who let me borrow medical books without a card. And a classmate who gave me her old clothes. But it was still hard. So hard. And then, one day, a miracle happened. A woman came to our door. She had kind eyes and wore a brown coat. She introduced herself as Mrs. Rayner, a social worker. "I heard about your mother from the hospital," she said gently. "I wanted to check in." I invited her in, embarrassed by the mess and the peeling walls. She asked a lot of questions. I answered all of them, trying to sound strong, like I had it all together. But then she looked at me and said, "You don't have to do this alone, Lena." I broke down. Mrs. Rayner helped us get connected to a program that supported families with chronic illness. We received a small monthly stipend, and more importantly, we were assigned a visiting nurse who came twice a week. For the first time, I felt like we could breathe. Still, I worked. I studied harder than ever. I had one goal, to become a doctor. I wanted to save people like my mother. I wanted to understand illness, to fight it, to defeat it, not just cry in the face of it. And I did it. I worked day and night, earned a scholarship, and got into medical school. Every day I came home, I told Mama what I had learned. "Did you know," I'd say, "that lungs can regenerate to some extent?" She'd smile. "So, there's hope for me yet." "Always," I whispered. "Always." Years passed. I juggled my studies and took on part-time jobs. My mother grew weaker, but her spirit never faded. She listened to my class lectures as if they were bedtime stories. She made me tea when I pulled all-nighters. She folded my scrubs with trembling hands. She told everyone, "My daughter is going to be a doctor." And every time she said it, my heart grew 10 times bigger. But then, one winter night, everything changed again. It was a cold January night, when I came home from a night shift at the hospital. I was in my final year of med school, doing clinical rotations. Exhausted, I opened the door to our apartment, and instantly sensed something was off. It was too quiet. My mother always waited up for me, no matter how late. She'd be in her chair, wrapped in her shawl, her favorite blanket on her lap, a warm cup of ginger tea beside her. But tonight, the blanket was folded. The tea had gone cold. I rushed into the room. She was lying in bed, too still, too pale. Called out, "Mama!" But she didn't answer. Her chest rose, barely, and her breaths were short and raspy. I grabbed her pulse. It was weak. Her oxygen tank was empty. I froze for a second, Then everything kicked in. I called emergency, checked her vitals, performed what I could remember from my rotation. My hands shook, my voice cracked as I begged the dispatcher to hurry. That night, she was taken to ICU, and I was taken back to that little girl sitting in a hospital hallway, hands clenched, heart trembling. She survived that night, but just barely. That, doctor said. She needs full-time care. Her lungs are failing. Her body is tired. They suggested a hospice, but I said no. I couldn't let her go just yet. Not without one more fight. I took a leave from school. I brought her home. I turned our tiny apartment into a makeshift hospital room, borrowed equipment, begged for a discounted oxygen concentrator, learned every single medication and schedule, became her nurse, her doctor, her daughter. And in those final weeks, we lived like we hadn't in years. We played her old records. I read her books. She told me stories from her youth, how she once dreamed of being a singer, how she loved poetry, how she was once in love with a boy who wrote her letters before he vanished into war. We laughed, we cried, we held hands. "Lena," she whispered, one night, her voice barely audible. "Promise me one thing. Anything. Don't stop living when I'm gone." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I don't know how to live without you." "You do. You've done it before. You've always been stronger than you think." I pressed my forehead to hers. "I don't want to say goodbye." She smiled weakly. "Then say thank you." She passed away 2 weeks later. Quietly, gently. In her sleep, her hand was in mine, and just like that, my world lost its brightest light. Grief is strange. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, like a soft fog that wraps around your life. I moved through it slowly. Some days I couldn't get out of bed. Other days I'd smile at a memory and break into tears 5 minutes later. But I kept my promise. I returned to med school. I graduated. At the ceremony, I carried a small photo of her in my coat pocket. When they called my name, Dr. Lena Alvey, I heard her voice in my heart. My daughter is going to be a doctor. Years have passed now. I work in the very hospital where she was treated. I specialize in respiratory care. I see patients with chronic lung conditions every day, and every time I do, I remember her. Sometimes I see single mothers walk in, scared and tired. I make sure they are never ignored. I sit with their children. I answer every question. I hold every trembling hand, because I know what it's like to be on the other side. One day, a little girl handed me a paper flower in the waiting room. She said, "My mommy's sick, but she says you're her angel." I knelt down, touched the girl's cheek and smiled. "You're the real angel. Take good care of her." That night, I looked up at the stars and whispered, "We're still here, Mama. Just like you wanted." If you've ever been raised by a single parent, especially one who sacrificed everything for you, then this story is for you. Love that doesn't come around often. And when it does, it shapes you for life. To every daughter or son out there caring for a sick parent, I see you. I honor your strength. You are doing better than you think. And to the single mothers who wake up every morning and keep going even when your body begs you to stop, you are the heroes this world rarely celebrates. Remember, it's not the size of your house or the money in your account that defines your worth. It's the love you give, the life you build, and the heart you carry, even when it's breaking. If this story touched you in any way, Please like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep telling the stories that matter. You never know who might need to hear them.